Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. If everyone could find a seat, please. Good morning. Thank you for coming to our October General PFA meeting. My name's Ann Wagner. I'm one of the co-presidents along with Sarah Vreda. Sarah is not feeling well this morning and is getting some well-deserved rest. So anyway, she might be watching, so hello, Sarah. We are thrilled to be hosting this meeting with the Saxe PTC and community, and we welcome back CARES as our speaker today. Before we get to the main topic, the high school PFA does have one item of business. So for those here with the NCHS community, I do need your vote. We need to approve our minutes from our September 6th general meeting. So can I please get a motion to approve the the September 6th general meeting minutes? Maria, thank you. Maria Magliacano. May I please have a second? Jess Knowles. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Hope not. Great. Wonderful. All right, motion approved. All right, so today I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how we arrive at our topics. So we're privileged to have CARES here today. And earlier this fall, Sarah and I met with Colleen Proster and Maureen Aziel. Am I saying that right? Sorry. Sorry. We did cover this too. In any case, the executive director and the program and education chair, respectively. In any case, we go through topics that seem really important and relevant for our community. And one that keeps coming up is healthy habits for our teens. And just as adults, we get a constant feed of options, be it food, social media, and so on. And what we landed on is how can we help them control the controllables? How do you control what you're putting in your body? And again, it doesn't always have to be food. It could be the community that you're surrounding yourself with, social media, any types of film, TV shows, etc. So in any case, that's just a brief overview of what we're going to dive into today. And then CARES, we're so lucky to have them that they have countless resources, aligned us with Dr. Raquel Harrison, who's here today to give us all of her pearls of wisdom. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to our beloved principal, Bill Egan, and he will share his thoughts as well, and then pass the mic to Maureen. Thank you.
Well, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, and hopefully everybody does, I'm Bill Egan. I'm the high school principal here, and it's great to have our Saxe friends here as well. We are so fortunate to be able to partner with New Canaan Cares. In a second, Maureen will come on up and introduce our speaker, Dr. Harrison. But we're very lucky to have a partnership with Cares because they continually provide great educational opportunities for our school community and the entire community, and we're thankful to have them as partners. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Harrison, who will dig deeper into the true effects of healthy habits, what happens to the body with proper nutrition and unhealthy nutrition. We all know we need plenty of rest, but what is the true consequence of not getting enough rest? Maureen will give Dr. Harrison's background. So at this point, let's have Maureen Aziel.
Aziel. No, it's
I knew it. I knew it. Hey, Maureen Aziel. Thank you, Maureen.
Hence why I didn't really want to change my name. Flynn is my former name. So anyway, now everyone knows who I am. I don't need any introduction. I'm the education and program manager for New Canaan Cares, a job that I truly love. For those of you that don't know Colleen Proster, she is our new executive director, former PTC president. Exactly. And CARES, our focus is on empowering youth, strengthening family, and building community. And as you've heard, we provide educational programming. And again, So everyone took my intro, but exactly. But I think this just speaks to the strength of partnership that we have with the PTC and the PFA, and the conversations that we have that goes into a program like this, Lessons for Life, helping your teen take charge of their health. And it really was a collaboration and figuring out what parents would like to hear from a health standpoint and really helping our kids, because we know with teenagers, they don't necessarily want to eat the things that we want them to eat. So, and Dr. Harrison has a lot of great insight into that. We have incredible resources in New Canaan. Dr. Harrison is a mom of three, a double board certified physician in both emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine. Her story is a little bit unique in that she's been working in the ER for a long time, and after 10 years, she wanted to have conversations with people, because in the ER, you see patients at the point of crisis. And as a physician, you know there's so much more that you can do. So she wanted to be able to have a conversation about prevention with her patients and now with the community. So hence, her second certification happened, and she does have a company called Acute to Root, which is really working with people to have these kinds of conversations. A fun fact about Dr. Harrison is recently she won the Drop the Mic speaking competition at the American Academy of ER?
Yeah,
Yes.
emergency physician.
Yes, emergency room medicine. And she, because of that, because she won, next year she gets to speak to her peers in a bigger group about lifestyle medicine, which is new. I actually met a woman yesterday whose daughter is a lifestyle medicine person as well. So it sounds like there's gaining traction. It's fairly new. So we're so thankful to have you here today, and I can't wait for everyone to hear.
Great. Everyone hear me, okay? Great, wonderful. So my style is such that I like to be interactive. So raise hands, ask questions, toss things out. My hope is to really kind of hone in on an overview of what it's like to start creating habits for your kids. And listen, I know this is challenging. I am not perfect. By any means, I try to live what I preach at the same time, especially when it comes to managing 3 kids at home. I know all this stuff is really challenging. So the goal is to kind of create a framework, something that allows you to say, okay, if I think about it maybe a little bit differently, I can start to engage my kids in a conversation that sounds maybe a little more foundational from a health perspective, so that when they are in college, they think twice. When they're out of college, they have something to come back to. That's the goal. As Maureen said, emergency medicine's an adrenaline rush, whatever you want to call it, but what you see over and over again is the accumulation of choices. And it was starting to get frustrating. And so that's what prompted me to pursue lifestyle medicine. I'll talk a little bit about it and kind of give you an overview, but that's ultimately the perspective with which I come at this from, okay? Exercise or pills for depression? Exercise 150 minutes a week is 1.5 times better at improving depressive symptoms than the common antidepressants. American Academy of Pediatrics says that exercise should be the first line of treatment for depression in children. Journaling or pills? 3 good things every night before going to sleep is just as effective as antidepressants if you do it for 1 week, with those effects being sustained for 6 months. If you do it for 15 days, it's even better than pills. The 15-day study was done in physicians, actually, down at Duke. Food, plants, or pills? A plant-forward diet provides you an amino acid called tryptophan. Now, you can find tryptophan in meat products too, except you don't absorb it as well in your brain when you're eating it with meat. So eating plant-forward gives you tryptophan, which then becomes serotonin, which is that pill that everyone's trying to give you, right? Sunlight or pills? Catching a theme here? Exposure to sunlight increases vitamin D. Vitamin D is what changes that amino acid tryptophan into serotonin in your brain. So we're going to do a quick overview of lifestyle medicine. I'm going to try to structure it in the context of cortisol, which I think everyone would probably say, oh, that's your stress hormone, right? And then give you some practical tips to help your teens. What's lifestyle medicine? So we're looking at the evidence, and hopefully you've seen that, right? The evidence of how to prevent and reverse chronic disease through lifestyle. Nutrition, social connection, sleep, exercise, reducing stress, and avoiding risky behaviors. Now, as you think about all these areas, everything that comes at us becomes a part of us. The easiest thing to think about is broccoli. I eat broccoli, it becomes a part of me, I get rid of whatever I don't need, right? I can't create it, I can't destroy it. But if you start thinking about the things we take in, like the music we listen to or the music our kids listen to, what's around us, right? It becomes part of us and it becomes part of our potential. The argument I'd make is pills can't cover this up, right? Medicine has made amazing advances, and I don't want to downplay that at all, right? Without penicillin, penicillin took our life expectancy from 47 to like 70. So I don't want to downplay medications, but there's a time and a place, and something we should be considering much more too, right? For the first time, our life expectancy is dropping in the United States. That's a problem. And so when we think about cortisol, we think about it as our stress hormone, right? It's that fight or flight. It's what ramps up when we're scared, confronted with a stressor. But we also need to relax. And if we're not relaxing, then that cortisol level is just, in some ways, stacking, and we get exhausted. Our ability to constantly respond is taxed and stressed. Does that make sense? So the issue is it's not just our stress hormone. It sets our rhythm for life too. And so this is what your cortisol does during the day. It rises throughout the night, peaks in the morning, kind of just after you wake up, kind of gives you that energy to get your day going, slowly falls, and then that 3 o'clock lack of energy that we all feel, right? That's it. It actually dips, and then it bumps back up again and comes down. We need it to come all the way down so that we can fall asleep at night. It's our awake hormone. This is our life hormone, okay? It also increases as we age. Look at this spike here. Sorry, my pointer's not gonna work. That spike is all of our adolescence. Your cortisol increases 35% during puberty, along with all those other hormones that are going wild, right? And so, as this kind of stacks, how do we help our kids think about this? And so, I'm gonna go through all the pillars of lifestyle medicine and kind of how they impact our cortisol. I would love to spend hours diving into the science, and I actually do it at the library. So if anybody wants to engage in some of those conversations, I'm also trying to get it online, and hopefully we'll have an online class running, hopefully in the new year. But so I want to touch on some of the science, but not necessarily really dive deep. At the same time, if you have any questions, please, like I said earlier, toss up your hand. When we talk about stress and the cortisol, as I said, there's this ability to kind of hold on to it and stack it. And so if you think about, let's use the analogy of driving a car. If I'm driving from 0 to 60, I need to come back down to 0 miles per hour. My average will be 30 miles per hour. The issue is if I only come down to 30 miles per hour, and then I have to get back up another 60 miles per hour, I'm now up at 90. And then I don't come all the way back down, and then I got to get back up. And all of a sudden, I'm changing my average speed. I'm increasing it. Similarly, that's what happens with stress. We can increase it, and if we're not coming all the way back down, we're just stacking it. Does that make sense? And so the question is, okay, well then how do we help our kids, because that's why we're here, how do we help our kids come down? Because there's plenty of things in society that's bringing them up and charging them higher and higher and higher. And Anne talked about this in the intro, which I really appreciate, but it's really this idea of, can we start to control controllables? Our kids are being confronted constantly with things that are out of their control, helping them label them as uncontrollable, and then saying, if this is an uncontrollable, let's say the time school starts, if that's an uncontrollable for you, then what can we control? And start to structure their approach based on things that are within their control rather than dwelling on the uncontrollables. And so what's tricky about stress too is it just often gets a bad reputation, right? We need some stress. That's how we grow. That's how we get better. That good stress is called eustress. It's just a nice framework, right? And so you want to be able to live in that green zone and have comfort in that no stress or relaxation. But if you don't ever push into that yellow zone of some stress, your green zone of stress will never increase either, of like no stress, right? The more I'm confronted with some stress allows me to grow where I'm relaxed. As an emergency physician, this is like our model, right? If I'm not bombarded with some amount of stress in a way that I feel supported, and I could never step into the role of being the one in charge to support someone else. And so if we too often extend past that into that area of distress, and we live in that area of distress, that's when we start hitting this impersonalization, that burnout. Right? Oops, sorry, went the wrong way. And so if we start to say, okay, well then how do we help our kids come back into that relaxation zone? How do we start to bring them back down? And this is where thinking through all those other 5 pillars becomes really important. And so all 5 other pillars interact with cortisol as well. When you talk about food, okay, if I eat something that's processed, simple in carbohydrates, my blood sugar will skyrocket. Effectively, what I've done is just eaten sugar and put it in my bloodstream. What then happens is your insulin goes high. Everyone's heard of insulin? It's the hormone that responds to the blood sugar in our system, right? But what happens is if it's gone into overdrive and overshoots, your blood sugar then tanks. Well, guess what hormone brings that blood sugar back up? It's your cortisol. And so if you're eating simple carbohydrates and not really focusing on whole foods, plants, fiber, complex carbs, you're going to overshoot and have a delayed response that drives up your cortisol. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? What about exercise? Exercise is probably the best way to naturally spike your cortisol. And then when you stop exercising, it comes back down. Your high intensity exercises are probably going to be the ones that do this the most. But this is kind of a nice natural way to drive up the stress in your body and let it come back down. Sleep. So I mentioned the importance of sleep. This is kind of a tricky slide. If you look at the black line, that's that cortisol curve just shifted. So I apologize, I don't have a better graph there. But effectively, when that cortisol hits its bottom, the blue rises, that's your melatonin. Now, melatonin is not actually what puts you to sleep, but it's like your blanket you just crawled into. That's effectively what it's doing. But unless that cortisol comes all the way down, your melatonin isn't going to properly rise. social connection. So this is worth a couple more minutes because I think this is probably one of the things that's most relevant for our middle schoolers and high schoolers, and quite frankly for us. There's a reason the Surgeon General has put out a big report this year, right, on social connection and loneliness. Coming off the pandemic, it's obviously on all our minds. The other thing that's really relevant is I think social connection adds like 7-8 years to your life if you have good positive social connection. People who live the longest, according to the Harvard Adult Development Study, which is pretty neat, study of 85 years, followed people for 85 years, is the people most socially connected who are living the longest. So this is not to be downplayed, and it's probably one of the reasons I love lifestyle medicine, is because this is highlighted, right? Oh, it got cut off there at the top, but McKinsey has a health institute, and they put out some pretty interesting reports that are generational studies that are worth some time if you're interested. But they did a whole report on the impact of tech and social media. This graph, I know it's busy and I apologize, but what I want to highlight here is that Gen Z self-identifies their mental health, social health, and spiritual health as poor or very poor more than any other generation. Now, there is positive effects to social media, hands down. It's actually a way a lot of young people access mental health resources, right? So you don't necessarily want to totally dismiss it. At the same time, Gen Z identifies social media as having a more significant negative impact on their mental health compared to any other generation. And it is correlated to how much they use social media. The more they use it, the more negative impact on their health. Any questions on this? Because it's kind of busy, I know. So the more social media you use, the more negative impact it has. And this is all self-perceived, right? This is hundreds of thousands of respondents in this survey. Now, I happen to know Chris Silvestri, who's a wonderful teacher and coach here at the high school, and helped me out here. What doesn't fit in this photo? An athlete with a phone, looking down, by himself. So one of the things that's awesome about sports, right, is this ability to engage without tech, in my mind. And so my perspective is this is kind of probably what should be happening in some regards to social media, right? And, you know, we can watch it in slow-mo if you want. But ultimately, the perspective here is, yes, I needed a little bit of comic relief, so thanks for indulging me. But ultimately, my perspective on this is if there's a third of kids who think that social media is negatively impacting their health, and we don't know that until after they've used it. We need to be having more of a conversation of what it means to create good social connections for our kids. Social connection, loneliness, and we get back to this, increases your cortisol levels. Not surprisingly, right? And cortisol decreases with hugs. I love that. There's awesome studies that actually point that out, right? But as you think about positive social connection, our brains are just healthier. Our prefrontal cortex, which is where we think and problem solve, has more connections. Our area for emotions is larger. Our area for learning and memory is larger. And it's one of those things that's just, ultimately, it's preventing dementia, Alzheimer's, general inflammation, cardiovascular disease. I could go on and on and on and why I love this topic. So thank you for indulging my pause on that. Avoiding risky behaviors as the last pillar. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but to highlight the importance of social connection here. You might be asking why there's a rat on the screen. Rats who are exposed in isolation to cocaine and morphine will overdose and die. Rats who have the availability of cocaine and morphine, but are surrounded by other rats and activities, do not overdose. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but being connected. And so, how do I translate all this into taking care of my teens at home, right? How do I make this actually practical? The piece is you got to start asking them why. A lot of people, when I talk to them, I ask them, well, why do you eat? The response almost inevitably is, do you mean what do I eat? No. I asked you, why do you eat? And you can almost have that same interaction with just about everything, right? And so when your kid goes to the refrigerator, and I'm going to use food as an example because it's an easy, very tangible one. But again, as I said, you can extrapolate this to all the other pillars. Why did you just go to the refrigerator? Now, that's a hard question for a teenager. So finessing it or maybe thinking about it for yourself, like why did my teenager just go to the refrigerator? And start to think about why they're making the habits they're making. So this is a framework I'm working on building out. But ultimately, we kind of approach things in a very conscious way or an unconscious way. When we think consciously about things, we're usually either structured by rules. Well, my mom told me I need to eat breakfast every day, so I go to the refrigerator and grab breakfast. Or we have an understanding, and we'll probably fall somewhere in that spectrum, but we have an understanding that if I don't eat breakfast, I'm going to disrupt that cortisol rhythm in my day. Right? And then I'm not going to necessarily have the same energy today or tomorrow because I've missed my breakfast. Those are very two different perspectives to the same habit. And there can be a very emotional piece to this or a very emotion-driven aspect, right? But is the question, is it the feelings you have now that are driving it, or is it the feelings you want? And so that idea of, well, I'm hungry, bored, sad. That's why I open the refrigerator. Or is it, I want to feel not hungry. I want to feel happier. I want to feel, not sad. And so it's more, is it being driven by how you're feeling in the present or a reward or a feeling that you want after? And so I do feel like they very much fall on a very conscious versus unconscious perspective. And so as you think about your teens and kind of watch them and what they're doing at home, can you start to say, okay, well, they are making some very conscious decisions, but maybe they are sitting more in that rule side of things. Or maybe they're being driven really by emotions. Or maybe they really want rewards, and that's driving their behaviors. And the more you think about it for your teen, the more you can help them and guide them and say, okay, well, why did you just do that? We have a 4th grader, and obviously love her to pieces, grabs a piece of bread and sits down for breakfast. I'm like, what are we doing? Right? But it's that, okay, I have the ability, because she's only in 4th grade, to really call her out on it, and I don't have to be as finessed as I might need to be in 5 years, right? But that idea of, okay, how do I start to frame it in, well, do I appeal more to her understanding? Because if I have a rational conversation with her, that's going to resonate. Is she someone who just needs to satisfy the moment of what she's feeling? And so it allows me to take a different approach to her. And she's a very rational little being, so I took the rational approach. If you don't put some almond butter or something like protein related, you're not going to have a good balance, and I can go on, and then she knows mom's just talking. But that idea of it really helps you reframe things for your kids and potentially stop a habit from consistently forming. And so understanding where they are can be really helpful. And then how does this all kind of come together, right? How does this all come together? I reached out to a junior here at the high school. I'm going to call them Sam, but their name is not Sam. And I want to highlight a few things in their schedule. This is their schedule. I didn't dive into the nitty-gritty of what they eat. I was actually really impressed by how regular their schedule is. which is really kind of great. The question is how often does breakfast get left behind? As you think about your own teens. How often does dinner actually get pushed later? How much is the exercise? Now, I think she's a varsity athlete, maybe, but so exercise becomes part of her regular day. But how much control do they actually have over that? That's the same question to a 7th grader at Saxe. And there's a few things that stood out to me here. Every single afternoon is different. That's really, really challenging. Sometimes they eat dinner before their activities. Sometimes they eat after. And as you start to think, okay, well, how do you come around your kid to think through this? Helping them structure this because they're not at a point to make these decisions on their own is really super important. Is really, really super important. And this mom does an awesome job, these parents, because of that recognition of sometimes she needs to eat before and sometimes she eats after. But as impressed as I was with both these schedules, I know this is not every day, and I know things get left off, right? Sometimes you're running out the door, and there's things that don't feel within your control. I would also argue with both of these, actually, that they could probably use a little bit more sleep. Adolescents, middle schoolers should probably be getting 9 to 10 hours of sleep. High schoolers should probably be getting 8 to 9. Adults should be getting 8 to 9. I didn't go into this, and I love the science of sleep, but the second half of our sleep, those last 4 hours, we're really spending a lot of time in REM. That's our critical thinking and our emotional regulation. And so if we shortchange the back end of our sleep, we're shortchanging that piece. So if you lack a regular breakfast, what does it do to that normal cortisol curve? It's shifting it out so you don't get that nice spike in the morning that wakes you up. And this compounds day after day. If you're exercising late, you're bumping your cortisol. So those practices that go until 9:30, which I'm not looking forward to for my kids, trying to understand how we control that in our home is going to be interesting. But you're bumping your cortisol, which means it's going to take some time coming down, and it's going to delay everything. What if you eat a pasta dinner after that practice? Remember I said there's a delayed rise in your cortisol. So you might get to sleep okay, but if your kid's waking up in the middle of the night, it's probably that high, simple carb dinner that they had really late. Yeah?
What in those evening times besides some carbs, so like protein, fruit, vegetables?
Exactly. Protein, vegetables. Yeah, focusing on things that are high fiber. Actually, generally speaking, across the board, when I talk people through diet and nutrition, it's if you're going to count a macro, count your fiber. And so what fiber does is it allows slower release of that blood sugar into your system. Fiber is only found in plants. So you need vegetables, you need whole grains, you need beans, other legumes. So this is like the nuts and bolts of how do you then translate all this, right? So in terms of reducing stress, try to get your kids to journal, if that's, or even just talking through what 3 good things might be. Create perspective. There's a wonderful book by Ethan Kross called Chatter, It's really focused on how do you create that mentality of when you're trying to process something or you're thinking about something stressful, can you be a fly on the wall and take an outside perspective? That can be really helpful. Spending time in nature, thinking about and labeling what's controllable, what's uncontrollable, right? And helping your kids think through that. The more you can help them think through it now, right? You set them up later for being able to do it on their own. Nutrition, identifying plants versus animals can be helpful. Really focusing in on getting that high nutrient density foods like your vegetables and fruits. Our kids' nutrition is based on their environment at home. What we have in the house is what they're going to eat, right? And I talk about this idea of fuel versus indulgence. Again, I am not perfect by any means, right? And I do want to make that clear. We do have things in our house that are not whole food, all plants all the time, right? But I do talk to my kids about what's fuel and when it's okay to indulge. And I do try to focus on that idea that, generally speaking, most of our nutrition should be fuel. And then, especially when it comes to sports games and, whatever other activities they have going on. Exercise and movement, structured versus unstructured. I want to take a moment here because that first slide I had was talking about the effects of exercise on depression. If I'm in a sports situation where I'm really stressed, that is probably not the type of exercise that is going to have that kind of impact on depressive symptoms. Does that resonate? And so if your kid is in a stressful exercise situation, trying to get them time moving that's unstructured can potentially be really helpful. I include the vitamin D piece here too because we can take advantage of these two together. Moving outside, hiking, walking, whatever that might be, is really beneficial. As the winter months come and you want to do vitamin D, this is just my quick science plug of just take it with K2 because that helps absorption.
How much vitamin D would you so can you say that or not really?
I mean, it just depends. I mean, in terms of like being outside or supplementation.
Supplementation.
I think it's typically like 500 units, international units, but they come in so many different formulations and so much of it's dependent on how you absorb it that, and you can also get it through, fortified milks, including non-dairy options. And so something to look at. Sleep, as I talked about earlier, making sure you have both quantity and quality. In terms of quality, blue light, I think there's a general understanding that blue light's not good for your melatonin. It prevents that rise we talked about. But again, the exercising too late or eating too late at night. Social connection, just making it as intentional as possible. The the silly video of the football players tackling each other. And I'm 100% guilty, but I feel that way when I'm looking at my phone and my kids are trying to talk to me, right? Like, can someone just please come tackle me? Right? Social media, think about how your teen interacts with it and what impact it might be having on them. If they're perceiving it as a negative impact, how can you come around them to reduce that? Remember, your family is your home team. Give them tons of hugs. It might sound cheesy and your teens may not love it or pretend not to love it, but they actually do love it. And then avoiding risky behaviors. My last plug on this is if your kid is on that more unconscious habit-making, slide, this is somewhere to maybe just have your ears more attuned, right? If they're making a lot of unconscious in-the-moment decisions based on wanting to feel a certain way or getting a certain reward, you may just have your eyes and ears a little more open to some of the riskier things that are unfortunately around in our society. If you're thinking about helping them make goals, SMART goals come up a lot. And probably a lot of you experience them either in work or other avenues. I like to add the idea of, well, then how do you actually make it happen? And so ACE it. Who's going to keep you accountable? Think about what's controllable, consider the environment around you, and set it up for success. If I want to drink 8 glasses of water a day, but I don't have a water bottle close by, that's going to be really hard, right?
Being a little vulnerable. I would say I do really well on the exercise piece of this. I do really well on the social connection piece of this, and pretty much bomb everything else. So, for people that maybe struggle in other areas, like where's the best place to start? Because these are all really important aspects, right? And then balance, all that stuff. But so, where should somebody start? Should they focus first on work on the exercise piece, get that done? Like, where should somebody start?
That's a good question. So, and one of the things to highlight, right, is there's a ton of complex interactions here, right? It's not just a one fix. That's the current model in medicine is give me a pill, so it fixes it. And so it's not that there's not a one answer to what you're asking, but more that idea. And what I like to do with people is think through what's that one thing you can start with that's going to have the most impact on your health. Let's, for example, say you eat. So as I said, lifestyle medicine is very plant forward, right? This perspective of trying to increase the amount of nutrients in your day. And you tell me, well, I have meat products at least 3 times a day. I want to get more vegetables in. Then structuring things in a way that says, okay, can we start with the goal of getting it down to 2 times a day? Or maybe it's 1 day a week where you're going mostly plants or all plants. And so trying to have that idea and perspective of where can you make the most impact and get the most bang for your buck, create a goal that's realistic, but you can actually do and get done. And so the question becomes is, as you dive in personally into these different areas, where do you feel like you can actually make a change that would result in a decent amount of impact? Now, my hope for medicine is that physicians come alongside people to help them figure that out, right? That's where things should be going. But if it's not, then it's, okay, take a moment to say, if I really think about my life, this is kind of a bad habit. I want to change that. Or maybe I wish I had this habit. Science does tell us that it's easier to add habits than take things away. And so it's easier to add something to your life than remove something that you currently do. So let's say you drink 8 Cokes a day. I've had that conversation with somebody. Drink 8 Cokes a day. And I asked them, well, do you drink any water? I don't drink any water. Okay. Well, every time you grab a Coke, can you also grab a water? Maybe you can't grab your next Coke until you finish that water. And then, are they drinking 16 things a day? Maybe, but at least they're balancing it out with water. But chances are that Coke's slowly falling off, or at least slowly reducing, right? So maybe they can only get in 4 because they have to drink so much water alongside it. And so a little bit of it is like, James Clear, Atomic Habits, great book, but it talks a lot about that idea of tying habits to other things. And so some of it's that introspective work of, well, what is it that potentially would give me the most impact, or what do I feel like is making me drag, or I'm only getting 5 hours of sleep a night and I really need to think about structuring things in a different way.
I should talk to my boss about giving me less work.
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah. If you didn't hear that in the back, he should get more hugs from his boss. These are just a few high impact resources that I like. The McKinsey Health Institute, there's a Gen Z-centric newsletter that they put out that's really good. And then I love all these books. Dopamine Nation, I will put the caveat on, is like not necessarily for little kids. It's a very mature audience book, but it's a very good book, and probably worth a read yourselves, but then maybe before your kids go off to college too. What questions can I answer?
Intermittent fasting, how do you fill that?
Yeah. So the question was intermittent fasting. So, and how does that play into it? So I would say when it comes to intermittent fasting for adults, this can be a really powerful tool. I do tend to say for my adult population, whoever does want to intermittently fast, do it in rhythm with the cortisol. A lot of people want to intermittently fast and skip breakfast because breakfast is really easy to skip. That's not the way to do it. You want to eat between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. For our young people, they need a lot of calories. Intermittent fasting is probably not the answer for them. They're growing, we need them to grow. They just need healthy calories. And that's where it's important to think about, right? And so if you're worried because your kid's eating late, like I said, then focus on the proteins and the nutrients in the evenings.
Well, I was just going to ask, can you give examples of different kinds of proteins, and maybe not just meat, but things that people can...
Yeah, so different kinds of proteins are really key. It can be a little tricky in the plant-forward world if people have a lot of allergies. That's the one thing I will say. But nut butters are great, just trying to make sure they're as organic and minimally processed as possible. Unfortunately, a lot of the nut butters are made with a lot of different oils and things that aren't super healthy. But also beans, lentils, that richness of proteins are really important. If your kid is an athlete and is really focused on supplementing their protein, which is not a bad thing, I would just recommend a plant-based protein. Trying to avoid the whey proteins just because they're tied with some other health risks that would be good to avoid. And kind of in that, smoothies can be a really powerful way to concentrate protein nutrition for young people. I like one-liner on that is if you're an adult who's trying to lose weight, concentrating all your calories in a smoothie isn't a great option. But if you're trying to increase nutrients, smoothies are a wonderful option.
And what about protein bars?
Protein bars are tricky. So it's all about reading nutrition labels. I'm going to give a talk actually on reading nutrition labels at the library next month. But it's all about the added sugar and the ratio of proteins and carbohydrates and fats. Good fats are actually wonderful. So getting your avocados, nuts, seeds in, olive oil, and some of the better oils can be a part of that as well. But, and I say some of this stuff not overly flippantly for our kids because we do have to worry about it. There's a huge rise of fatty liver disease in adolescents and teens. And so we do have to be thinking about maximizing nutrition for this age group and just teaching them how to do it well, right? Any other questions? I can stick around too. My email's up there in case anybody has any questions.
Thank you all. This was fantastic. And when are you at the library, just so we can generally?
I'm going to be there once a month until the summer, I think. And then I'm restarting the series, going through each pillar next September, hopefully.
So thank you all so much. And if there's anything that comes out of it, oh, yes, thank you. If there is a feedback survey, so if anyone would like to write it, that would be fantastic, and giving us other ideas for future programming in 2024. Thank you.